long have we known each other now?
About an hour.
Right? Pretty
well,
deep.
in person. We've been emailing. We've been emailing longer than that.
Right. Well, we were looking forward to this. It was like grand buildup.
I know.
Imagine you've just ended this conversation with me here on 50 Tastes of Grey, and a little bit later today, a friend asked you, so what was your experience like with Matthew on 50 Tastes of Grey?
You know, this has been the most deep diving podcast interview I've done so far in this book promo journey. And I have really appreciated the chance not to just talk about the book. And I could talk about the book for 10 hours, don't get me wrong, but it's been fun to also share a lot about my life outside of that. And my love of food, because that's something else I could talk about for 10 hours. I could talk about melted cheese alone probably for that long. So it's just been fun to share more of myself with someone else who has similar interests. I had the most fun. This was delightful.
I'm Matthew Gray. Welcome to 50 Tastes of Grey. You just heard author Juliet Izon reflecting on our conversation. Now, let's start at the beginning. So what part of the world are you in?
I am in New York City. I'm on the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Upper East Side. Nice.
Yeah.
It's a little bit quieter there than the Upper West Side, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're both really family friendly. And I moved from downtown, so it definitely feels sleepier than what I'm used to. But it is very beautiful up here, and Central Park is a delight.
Yeah.
So I can't complain about that. And honestly, I think the streets get cleaned faster up here post snowstorm and after this polar vortex we've been having. I do appreciate that right now, that the sidewalks are actually concrete and not just ice.
Yeah. Did you guys get slammed by the storm?
Yeah, we really did. We probably got, especially for New York City, because it doesn't stick here very often. I think it was maybe close to a foot or maybe over a foot. Yeah.
So has it calmed down now a little bit?
Well, we're still in this weird polar vortex. So the temperature hasn't been above freezing in probably 2 weeks. So the snowstorm hit last week and nothing's melted. So there's just these massive mountains plowed to the side of the road. Not like Hawaii, I can tell you that much.
Right. You know, the other day I saw a post that you made over on Instagram and you were wearing this awesome shirt. Is that a new shirt? And would you like to share what it said?
Yes. So my very good friend, Kevin, that is his husband's company. It's called Fake Friends. They're based in LA, and it's in very beautiful Gothic script, says fuck ice.
You know, if you're going to say fuck ice, you might as well put it in Gothic script.
Yeah, I think so.
That's pretty funny.
I love that shirt.
Yeah, that was very cool. So, okay, Juliet, riddle me this. In the world of music and all kinds of intimate performances, what's almost as fulfilling as the climax but comes right after?
I mean, I'm not even sure how to interpret that. I love a good beat drop.
Okay, but there is one really obvious answer to this, given who you are.
The encore?
Exactly. On the nose.
I like that. Yes, of course.
In all seriousness, your debut novel is called The Encore. In the world of romance and rock and roll, do you think the second time around, The Encore, is often more fulfilling than the first round?
Ooh, I think in the case of this book and that relationship, absolutely. But in general, sure.
Congratulations on your debut novel. I guess it drops on March 3rd, which will be pretty good timing for this release.
Yeah, wonderful. I can't believe we're finally under a month away because, as you know, books take so long to get out into the world. And so when I, signed that deal in spring of 2024, I guess, I was like, oh my gosh, 2026, who knows where we're going to be? I mean.
Exactly.
But now we are almost there, which is very exciting.
So will you be doing the whole media thing, a book touring thing?
It's funny. I think at first I was like, no, it's just going to be a stop in New York and then a stop in upstate New York because we spend a lot of time up there as well. And I've been really lucky that just sort of based on interests and where I've got community, it's sort of ballooned now. I think we've got 10 different events on the schedule between March and May. So I'm very excited. I do not have a Hawaii stop. I wish that I did. Fingers crossed.
I know.
That can happen later.
Now, I noticed that People magazine made mention of your upcoming book. That's pretty killer.
That was very exciting. I did my cover reveal with People. So that's definitely been one of the most exciting days in this whole journey, is to have a big magazine like that. And I used to work for a different celebrity weekly, so it felt very full circle in a way to have them be the ones to announce it.
Now, you've written for everybody, it seems, all different kinds of lifestyle and food and design and music and all of that. So that's pretty awesome right there. I'm wondering if you've been practicing your signature for all these book signings you're going to do, because as a journalist, you don't really have to do that very much, but now you're faced with having to make a nice signature.
That's a great question, because I have been practicing in the shower, right? Because I'm not wasting paper that way. Because everyone says, all my writer friends say, don't use your legal signature, which didn't even occur to me, right? That you should have a separate one. But obviously that makes sense for safety reasons. So, and everyone said, do something that maybe moves more from your elbow as opposed to your wrist in case you end up signing a lot of stuff. So I've been trying to figure out, is that maybe first initial, last initial? What might that look like? So I bought a fancy author pen at a nice stationery store that's very smooth, but I haven't yet perfected the signature. I'm still working on that. So I've got like a month to get it down.
I know. I'm thinking, the time is running out, Juliet.
It's true.
So what kind of a pen is it that you got? What's an author's pen? Is that a gel pen or is that a specific brand?
I wish I could remember the brand, but it's like a fancier pen than a Bic or something that I'd normally use. But there's a wonderful store in New York called Goods for the Study, and they sell stationery and pens and beautiful greeting cards and all sorts of stuff. And I was with a friend from out of town who's also an author, and she loves all of those sorts of things. And so we went in and she was like, you should get a pen. This is a rite of passage for an author. And so it's gold and it's very weighty. So it feels very important when you're holding it. And it's pretty slim and it comes in a cool little octagonal case. So I feel very official with it.
Wow, that another very, very fancy object that you'll be carrying around. You better keep it tethered to yourself so you don't lose it.
I know. I'm worried about that already.
Yeah. I lose pens all the time. So, speaking from that experience, oh boy. Okay, Juliet, you're a food expert. So let's just shift the gears for a moment. Let's ask you, what have you eaten today?
Okay, good question. I just went for breakfast this morning to a new bakery in Long Island City that I'd really been wanting to try. It's called Some Days. And I got 3 different things to try. So I had their regular croissant, which is made with New Zealand imported butter, which was fantastic. And then some sort of almost like a lattice-topped pistachio croissant almost situation. Delicious. And then I got one savory item that's sort of like a swirl, and it has some spinach and cheese, but there's a little bit of hot honey with it. So it gives you that dual flavor combination. And the pastry on it was so light and so airy, and they were all wonderful and worth the trek out to Long Island City, where it's very windy on the water.
Wow. So 2 croissants and an awesome savory dish as well. To hell with the protein.
No, who needs it? There's some cheese in there. You get a little bit of protein.
Okay. Well, speaking of cheese, what's your favorite pizza topping or toppings?
I'm an extra cheese girl, hands down.
Do you like your crust crunchy?
I do. And I like a thin crust because I'm more of a toppings person than a crust person. However, this is controversial here in New York. I love a Chicago deep dish because I think what people don't realize is that crust itself is not very thick. You just have a ton of toppings, which is sort of my jam anyway. So I have been known to order Chicago deep dish frozen and have it shipped to New York. Yeah.
When they do the crust on the Chicago pizzas, it's pretty amazing. It's all kind of like oily and greasy and crunchy all at the same time.
Yeah, a little bit buttery. It's great. I love it.
Yeah. Okay, so what would be the perfect beverage for the pizza that Juliet Izon orders?
I love a root beer with pizza.
Wow, awesome. That's the answer.
Is it? Okay, great.
You're the first one in 3 years who said that. So that's pretty amazing. I've never gotten that before. I'm stymied. I'm flummoxed and all that.
That's great.
That is really cool. Now, something serious. What's your philosophy on tipping? That whole awkward, crazy, stupid thing that's been going on.
I mean, I always tip. I think if you are even tangentially connected to the food industry, you know how important that is. And while I wish we were in a culture where there was a little bit more stability baked in for people in the hospitality industry. That's not how it is right now. So I tip on everything.
Do you tip out of obligation, or do you tip on the fact that you do have some backstory and understanding of the way the world works in restaurants?
I mean, I think I know that it's an important part of everybody's salary. And so it's just sort of necessary.
Interesting. Okay. What's your favorite guilty pleasure?
In terms of food?
You tell me.
Ooh, I'll give you a food one because I just introduced my daughter to it for the first time, which is I love an Auntie Anne's cinnamon sugar pretzel. And recently I was in an airport and we were stuck there for a few hours and I was like, oh, it's time. We've got time to kill. This should be your introduction to, one of the best airport train mall snacks around. And so I got her, actually, they make the cups of the bites, which are tossed in the cinnamon and sugar. And so she was like, this is amazing. I was like, oh, I know.
You're training her early to love all these delicious treats.
Absolutely.
Now, what's your take on anchovies?
I love an anchovy. I was just thinking about them this morning. I mean, I guess I think about anchovies more than the average person, but, there's an Alison Roman pasta recipe, which maybe you're familiar with if you're an anchovy person, that calls for like 8 shallots and tomato paste and anchovies, and you kind of cook it down. It is so delightful, and I always try to make a double or quadruple batch so I can freeze some. But I love anchovies. I love them in Caesar salads, particularly boccherones. On pizza, it's not my go-to, but I don't mind.
Think because the salt-cured ones are the ones they often use on pizza, it's not as good as the oil-cured ones.
Yeah. Sometimes they can actually be too salty.
Right, exactly. But yeah, when they're melted down into a dish or a recipe, they're fantastic.
So great. Just such a good hit of umami.
Seeing as though you've known and visited the Hudson Valley, what's your take on foie gras? Is it a moral crisis? Is it a guilty pleasure? Or is it a misunderstood ingredient?
That is a hot button topic, especially here in New York State.
You bet.
Where do I fall on this? Okay, personally speaking, foie is not my favorite in terms of texture and taste. I love a good Italian style pureed liver on a crostini, Tuscan style. But foie itself, sort of, fried a lobe on top of something, it's a little too unctuous and a little too fatty for me. So in terms of personal taste, if someone told me you can never have this again, it would be fine.
You'd be okay.
But that being said, I do think that especially in the Hudson Valley, which is a hot spot for foie, there are farmers that are doing it ethically. And I think when you talk to a lot of chefs who like to use it, they feel stifled when they're not allowed to. And I understand that as well. And I also know, obviously, if it's being done in an inhumane way, that's really terrible for the animals.
You prefer pate more than the actual foie being sautéed?
Yes.
Okay. And what is the ethical way to be able to create that or raise that?
I wish that I could give you a better answer on that. I mean, just chatting from 2 chefs upstate, I know that there are better ways than not to do it, but I don't know the specifics off the top of my head.
Right. Yeah, I never knew that either. And yeah, I've been a chef for a million years, and I don't know how they ethically raise that to make it viable for restaurants.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't know either. This is something we should look into, I guess.
We'll circle back on that when the edit gets done here.
Yeah.
If you're cooking, what does your seduction dinner consist of?
Ooh, I love a long cooked sauce. I'd say my favorite go-to would be a bolognese. I like Martella Hazans a lot. It's very simple and it is its most classic form, but occasionally I like to go a little bit more new school with it, and I'll simmer Parmesan rinds in there, or I add, a little more heavy cream, or I mix up my meats. I've been known to just use Italian sausage rather than just start from, a beef and pork combination.
Mm-hmm.
And then just let that, simmer for a couple hours ideally, and then toss it with pasta. And I like a very saucy pasta, which is, I think, one of the reasons why I like making it at home, because then I can sort of dictate what my sauce to pasta ratio is. So that's.
Growing up, were you a food lover? And is that what kind of led you in to be able to write about restaurants and food related stories?
Absolutely. I've always loved to eat, and I come from a family of eaters and cooks. I've never professionally worked as a chef by any means, but my mom was always a big cook. So I think I started cooking pretty young and always, even as a 22-year-old when I first moved to New York, my friends and I would save up for big meals or read the hard copies of GAT back in the day to figure out, where we wanted to go for a special occasion. And so at some point I got a job at a magazine chain that no longer exists where I was sort of just a general interest writer. And so I covered everything, but I very quickly realized how much I loved writing about food and interviewing chefs. And so when I went freelance a few years after that, that became one of my tentpole topics that I love to write about: restaurants, the hospitality industry, interviewing chefs, trend pieces, a little bit of everything.
So during that time when you were writing about restaurants and chefs and so on, were you kind of on the periphery of learning more about cooking?
I'd say so, because I think a lot of times when you're interviewing chefs, or even when you're just going to restaurants to try the food, you're absorbing what the trends are, whether that's how the service runs or what you're being served. Is it large format? Is it small plates? Is it one big table? Is it not? So you just sort of develop a better sense of the industry just from being adjacent to it in that way.
So you're very comfortable in the kitchen. Can hubby cook as well?
He can, although I mostly put him on grilling duties because it's too finicky for me. I like, and that's why I like baking too. So if it's the summer and we're doing burgers or grilled chickens or sausages, then that's his job. Out back.
That's very smart, Juliet, when you think about it, because you get the man the hell out of the kitchen and put him out by the grill. I like that strategy.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Because it's, there's a thinly disguised message in there.
Just give him a beer. He's happy. It's fine.
Right. Now, you've written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Travel and Leisure, and countless others. What did you have to unlearn about writing for magazines and newspapers that turned you from a journalist to a first-time novelist?
Well, that's a great question. You can definitely get more, obviously, creative, first and foremost, because not everything needs to be based in fact. And I think that was the most fun part about writing a book for a novel for me, is that I'm so used to, as a journalist, basing everything in research or the word count my editor needs or my interviews. And with this, when I first started writing, it can just come from your own brain. So you can write a lot faster because of that, because you're not constantly sort of referencing various sources. So, everyone's like, well, how did you have time to write a book on top of all the other stuff? But I was like, well, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't fun. But it was such a release for me to write creatively. And I think that's why I did it. And that's why it was so great to work on it. The main character in my book, Anna, is a very successful indie rocker, I guess you'd call her. And it was fun imagining what that life might look like.
Did you pattern her after someone that you're familiar with?
I would say there's definitely a hearty dose of Tori Amos in there. I'd say there's some Maggie Rogers and some St. Vincent, Annie Clark.
Okay. Now, what's the moment that you realize, I'm not reporting anymore, I'm confessing?
Within the book?
Yes. Because there had to be kind of a changeover, a switch in your personality and your style. Like you said, it's not all based in research. Now it's based on a little bit of imagination.
Yeah. I guess, so part of my early days as a writer, when I was doing more of the nightlife circuit or the celebrity news circuit, was more the stories I was writing or reporting were more focused on fame, right? And I never felt entirely comfortable doing that because it could feel invasive at times, even if you were just interviewing somebody on the red carpet. And so I think part of my impetus for writing the book was also exploring that. And I wouldn't say the book is necessarily a mea culpa for that reason, but I do think I wanted to show that fame is not always cracked up to all the sunshine and roses, and that it can be sort of corrosive as well.
We have to steer clear of any spoilers, but I have to ask you, why music? Why talent? Why the pressure cooker of elite conservatory life?
So the idea for this sort of started percolating towards like the end of COVID. It wasn't like a 2020 thought, but at some point, right as theater and music was beginning to open up again, and you could have people in these large settings together that weren't 6 feet away, I was thinking a lot about what it would be like to be someone whose career depended on crowds. And so what might happen when you were fully prevented from doing that. But I didn't want to write a COVID novel like many of us. And so then it was sort of thinking hypothetically, okay, so what if you have a character who, for whatever reasons, only feels like herself when she's on a stage? And what would happen if that were in peril? And what sort of obstacles could you throw in her way to make her choose? And what might she give up in order to maintain the ability to be on a stage? And that was the thread I initially started pulling. And then from there, it sort of took on a life of its own and snowballed. I'd say just, I think a lot of us are fascinated by the idea of, this duality of an onstage persona versus offstage, especially with celebrities, where you're like, well, what are they like in their real life? Are they different? Are they not? And so it was sort of all, thinking about that. That was the genesis.
Interesting. Is there a piece of music that feels like your emotional autobiography or through line or soundtrack?
I mean, for this book, I would say almost every scene is scored in my head. So there's a public playlist on Spotify that tracks to every artist and song that's mentioned within the book. But then I have another one that's what I was listening to as I was drafting. And still now, 2-3 years later, I'll hear some of those songs. And if I haven't listened to them in a few years, it immediately brings me back to where I was and what was happening in that scene. And it's just funny because obviously these characters aren't real people, but the emotions I feel when I listen to that song again, are. So it's fascinating.
It's really cool what music and food and smells and other things can kind of do to your emotional makeup and be able to take you back to a place 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
What's the sound you think Anna, Will, and Lottie, the main characters in Encore, carry inside them?
Collectively or what? Yeah. I mean, I think it's something more classical, maybe like one of the Vivaldi Seasons pieces, because I think they share more of the classical music together than any other genre.
Yeah. Now, what instrument do you play?
I can play a little piano. I was awesome at the recorder as an elementary school student, but I can't say I've picked it up in a long time.
So is that something that your background in a little bit of music and playing and so on actually worked itself into the book?
I mean, I wish I could say yes, but the truth is I was never great at piano. My dad was a musician, among other things, and he was great at the guitar and bass, and he could play a little piano as well. So I grew up with a lot of music in the house and watching him play. And my husband plays guitar and piano, but I unfortunately am more of a listener or a concert goer than anything else.
What's the last concert you saw that you really loved?
I just went to see Sudan Archives last week at Webster Hall. And I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's phenomenal. It's sort of hard to categorize her, but she just does the craziest rock stuff with electric and regular violin that you've ever seen.
Well, that sounds very cool. So her band, a bunch of musicians with interesting instruments, more so than the traditional ones?
It's just her. It's just her. I mean, I don't know who plays on her album, but at the show itself, it was just her on stage. So she's programming some things. She's playing a little piano, and then she has an electric violin and a regular violin and this super cool contraption that's set up so she doesn't need to hold it all the time. And then she just had a head mic so she could wander on stage, and it was awesome. And it happened to be her birthday too, so I think it was an especially raucous show for that reason.
That sounds great. Juliet, there's a night in your book that changes everything. When you wrote it, did you know this would be the fault line of the story?
I did. And I guess we'll keep it like somewhat veiled, because that is such an important night. But I think at some point when I knew what the greater trajectory of the narrative would be, that is the night that spurs all the rest of the action. So I knew that needed to be a scene, and I knew it needed to be a good one. And so that probably got rewritten almost more than anything else.
Now, as far as the plot mechanics go, did you think this all through at the beginning, or were you just flowing organically during the time you were writing this?
It was definitely the latter, because I never expected to write a novel. I think any journalist, if you ask them, would you like to write a book? They'll probably say yes, because that's such an amazing feather in your cap. But I was not one of those writers that said to myself, my career or, my professional goals will never be fulfilled unless I write a book. And I think I thought if I wrote one, it would be ghostwriting someone's design book or writing head notes for a cookbook or something like that. But I got these ideas for these characters. And I kept thinking about it, and it was starting to keep me up at night. And so finally, one day when I'd finished all my journalism work, I wrote down a scene, and it felt very self-indulgent because I was like, why am I even doing this? But I think in my head, I was like, well, maybe this will help me go to sleep. If I just write them down and then shelve it in Google Docs and never think about it again, like it'll be out of my head. But what ended up happening was the opposite, which was that I was having so much fun fooling around with these characters that I just kept writing different pivotal scenes in their lives. And then eventually I was like, should I string these together? Like, what's happening here?
Right.
So that's what I finally ended up doing. And I mean, I knew so little about novel writing that I was literally Googling, like, how long is a book, right? Like, how many words is this supposed to be? So I was really starting from zero. But eventually, I sort of strung everything into order. And, as you may be familiar, there's a term with drafting, whether you're a pantser or a plotter, right? So plotters make an outline and pantsers write by the seat of their pants. And so that's really what I did for this book, because it was all out of order and I didn't even know it was going to be a book until it revealed itself to be one.
That's interesting behavior, because I think it kind of duplicates itself in many other realms of life and not only writing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and what's funny is when I'm writing an article, I'm always a plotter, right? And also those are a lot shorter. So you don't need to be doing quite the extensive amount of outlining as you do for a whole manuscript. But I'm generally fairly type A and precise with things like that. So it was interesting to me that this flowed out the way that it did.
It's crazy when you get an assignment to write by someone else and they say, okay, give me 2,000 words about this experience. You go, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Right? Because you got to stay within the structure that's been handed down to you. But as a writer of fiction or your own novel, it's a completely different approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's particularly challenging about writing creatively, writing fiction, is there is still a commercial aspect to it, right? Unless you really never want to get it published or you want to self-publish and you really want to play around with form. But even though it's art, if you would like it to be traditionally published, there are certain rules you need to follow. And I think some authors really do chafe at that because they think, if this is my vision, I shouldn't have to compromise. And it's like, sure, that's true. But then you have to understand that there just might not be the market for that specific book. So it's interesting now going through this process of not just writing it, but having it be edited and meeting with the marketing teams and the PR teams in terms of all the different hands that touch the book and package it for public consumption.
It's really a dance, isn't it? There's a bit of choreography involved in being able to write something that's commercially viable, but then something that also satisfies yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the tour bus, because this forces three characters of yours who've been avoiding each other for 20 years into a moving box. So tell us a little bit about that.
I had a lot of fun researching this book. So I wrote the initial draft and I watched a lot of YouTube videos to sort of supplement my knowledge where I didn't have it. So whether that was students who go to Juilliard or the Curtis Institute in Philly, or I found a great series with a tour manager where she went through very granularly what her day looks like and all the different people involved in loading in and loading out. And then I found a handful of videos of crew that were just giving tours of their tour bus and what that looked like. And those to me were so fascinating because you really saw how tight that space is in some ways, but in other ways, you can sleep a lot of people on one of those. You've got bunks, you can have a bedroom in the back, depending on the setup. There's a bathroom, there can be a little kitchen, there's an area to hang out. But it was little things like watching that video where somebody said, always sleep with your feet toward the front of the bus. Because if you brake hard, you want your feet to hit, the bunk wall and not your head. And I was like, oh, that's such a good detail. So, that made it into the book. But that was something where I think if I hadn't done that research, by watching videos that I wouldn't necessarily have even thought about.
Now, I want to find a little bit more out about your personal side, and more so than just the book. But as far as being a writer, Hudson Valley or Manhattan, where do you write better?
I mostly write in Manhattan because when I'm in the Hudson Valley upstate, I'm generally there on the weekends or during school breaks for my daughter. So I don't get a lot of time to myself up there. However, in a dream world, it would be amazing to be up there on my own and doing sort of a little self-imposed residency. So maybe one day that can happen.
Now, how old is your daughter? You've mentioned her a couple of times.
She just turned 10 2 days ago.
Wow, happy birthday. What's her name?
Her name is Aveline, Avi for short.
Aveline's a great name. Where does that come from?
It's French. And one of the meanings is hazelnut tree. And I'm not French, but I just really liked French names. So I don't have a better story than that.
What about Izon? Where does that name come from? Is that Hebrew?
It's Filipino. It's Izon.
Filipino.
Yeah, so it's Filipino by way of the Spanish.
Okay, so your family is Filipino descent?
My dad is, and then my mom is Italian American.
Okay, and how many languages are you speaking these days?
God, so this is the sad part. I obviously speak English, and I was a French minor, although it's rusty, but I don't speak any Tagalog because my dad never really spoke it to me growing up, unfortunately. So, I know a handful of words, but that's about it.
What about Filipino food? Do you like that cuisine?
I love Filipino food. My dad
Do you?
made the best adobo. So I really need to learn how to make it myself. But, I think for the last few years, we've seen a bit of I wouldn't even call it a resurgence because it was never there to begin with, but we're seeing more Filipino restaurants open. And I think every year everyone's like, this is the year. Filipino food is really going to hit. And, as a half Filipino person, I'm always aware of where the new ones are opening, but I don't think we've gotten fully there yet. But every year I think I keep hoping maybe this will be the year, but we've got some really great ones in New York City. So that's great.
Do you guys visit new restaurants on your own without being assigned to write about them?
Yeah, I do. I mean, a lot of the restaurants I go to are for work to either write about or consider for a story. But in general, there's so much wonderful food in New York that really any opportunity I have to try a new place, I do. And I have an extensive Google Sheet list of where I want to go that's sorted by cuisine and neighborhood. And then I also just keep track of where I want to eat on my actual Google app. So that way, anytime I'm anywhere, I can open it up and be like, oh, there's the bakery I wanted to go to, or there's the matcha spot. So that's been very useful.
Oh, that's very cool. Let's do a little bit of a food lightning round, shall we?
Yes, let's do it.
What's the most overrated restaurant behavior?
Maybe bragging that you can get a reservation somewhere.
Now, that's really a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, especially in New York.
So there's a bunch of people trying to make the scene and, and like just showing their stuff, and it's not anything to do with the restaurant, or does the restaurant play a role in that?
I think there's certain restaurants in New York that have become a status symbol, and most of them are legitimately very good. But I think, a place like Polo Bar at this point, which is basically impossible to get into unless you know someone. At this point, if you go, like, everyone's taking a photo just to be like, look, I went, I'm here, I had the burger,
How many of those great restaurant experiences are really great for the experience of the food and the service more so than just making an Instagram post?
I think it depends. And, New York is senior than most cities. Without naming names, there's certainly restaurants that are impossible to get into where the hype is because of the scene or who has eaten there versus that the food is some of the best in the city. Just the nature of the game.
It's so funny that a place would become popular or familiar because such and such star who probably knows nothing about taste, flavor, or food goes there.
Yep. It's so true, though.
Now, Juliet, what's a dish that you'd resurrect from a restaurant, maybe from your past, but the restaurant does not exist anymore?
I know exactly what my answer is. So there used to be a restaurant on Cornelia Street called Poe. And in the springtime, they made a pappardelle with a sweet pea and mint sauce that had a decent amount of Parmesan, a little lemon zest in there. That was so phenomenal. And that restaurant unfortunately closed many years ago. And one time I asked the chef for it and he sort of verbally gave me an approximation. So I have tried to make it myself, but it's never been quite as good. And I also think, yes, you can try to make it with frozen peas, but you really need to make that dish in season when you've got peas at their freshest. So maybe I should try again this spring.
I think so. I think it's worth a shot. And, you can always just try to find a little bit of extra flavor and nuance with that as long as you practice it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really crazy. There are a lot of people out there, cookbook authors and chefs and so on. And they're always very hesitant to share their recipes because, oh my God, someone's going to steal their recipe and open up a competing restaurant. And that's so much BS. Why do you think that people don't like to share their recipes?
I think because chefs oftentimes, especially if it's a sort of canon recipe for them, they spend sometimes years perfecting it. And so they're rightfully proud of it, but also very possessive of it for that reason. Especially, you know, with some of these places that have been open for generations. I was just talking to someone whose family has owned a pasta restaurant for a long time about whether she'd ever do a cookbook. And she said, I'm not allowed, you know, or I could, but it couldn't be the recipes that we're known for because I'm, you know, by family edict, no one would ever want those in a cookbook.
I totally object to that. All throughout my life, when people said, how do you make that? I give them the recipe, I spell it out, and I know it'll never be as good as mine. And they'll always come back to me anyway.
Yeah. Right. Well, because eating at a restaurant in particular is so much more than just the dish itself, right? It's how you feel when you're there and what the service does and the decor and everything.
Yeah. You know, great food has more to do with technique than it does the ingredients, but don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
It's a secret.
Exactly. And butter.
Well, butter. Yes. Tell us about butter. You were just talking about the New Zealand butter. What makes it so special?
I don't know what is so special about that butter in particular, but it was enough that they had written it sort of underneath the description of the croissant. It said, you know, with imported New Zealand butter. I love butter. I lately have been trying to be a little more intentional about my butter when I'm baking and not just grabbing, you know, the Land O'Lakes or whatever and getting the fancier French to use in my baking. One of my very good friends, Allie Rosen, is a cookbook author and a romance author as well. And she was like, you should only ever be using salted butter in your recipes. She's like, I don't know why you would ever use unsalted. So I've been playing around with that as well.
Well, that's a very interesting take. I've not heard that from professional cooks in my past.
Yeah. So, you know, even like I've been using it in boxed mac and cheese. And I was like, oh, you know what? This is better. Just gives you like a little extra hit of salt. So,
but you could always add that after the fact, can't you? To season it to the place where you want.
Yes, absolutely.
But I guess you could do that with salted butter too, if it doesn't meet your standard of salt level.
Yeah.
Okay. What's a food that people judge you for?
That's a good question. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I mean, I'm a pretty, well, how about this? You had my friend Hannah Selinger on a few months ago.
Yeah.
And, I hate olives. So we're always joking because she loves olives.
Olives across the board you hate?
I like olive oil, but olives across the board I find disgusting. So I get judged by her and some of my other friends for refusing to eat them.
And now we have to get back at Hannah a little bit. Is there anything that she eats that, you know, or she doesn't eat that you do?
That's a good question. She's allergic to a lot of nuts, so I can't really judge her for that. But, you know, I love a good nut butter or nuts in salads or in soups or something like that. So that's definitely something she can't partake in.
You know, you don't think that Hannah's allergy to nuts is really like the way people say they're allergic to gluten, but they're really not?
No, hers is an actual one.
Okay. What's the character in your book, the Encore, that you'd most want to have dinner with if you had that choice?
I definitely want to have dinner with Anna the most because she's the most enigmatic and complicated. And there'd just be so many things I'd want to ask her about in terms of her own life or just her life as a musician.
Yeah. Now, what do you want people to leave with? Or what do you think that people are going to leave with after reading your book? What kind of a sense or feeling or understanding will they hold?
I mean, I'd love for them to love those characters so much that they'd want to see what happens at the close of the book. And I don't necessarily mean that in terms of a proper sequel, although I would love to. If somebody told me write a sequel to these characters, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I think I want to write the sort of book that gets you in those emotional feels and that you really think about in the days after reading it in terms of the dynamics of the relationships and just thinking about the characters. For me, when I read a book like that, where I'm thinking about the resolution of the plot or the characters themselves in the days after, that's when I know it's really touched me.
Now, when you were writing your book and you were closing in on getting to the end of it, did you give copies to friends and family and your hubby and that kind of thing to get their take on it? If so, were any of their suggestions or thoughts anything that you made changes to in the book?
Great question. So I had a handful of journalist friends that were sort of reading behind me to sort of save me from, swerving too far in one direction. And so they gave great feedback on, everything from typos to, do you want to rewrite this scene? I don't know if that feels like what that character would do in that moment. And then I didn't give it to my husband until after I had an agent, because it just felt like such a personal project. And it was one thing, I think, to give it to other people sort of within the industry, but to share it with him was sort of really acknowledging that this was a real project and that I wanted to do something with it. And so he read it when that first draft was completed and was lovely and very complimentary. But yeah, it was definitely nice to have those sounding boards. And I've written a draft of a second book. We'll see if it gets picked up. But that one as well, I had one or two people reading behind me and now a handful of people who've read it in one go. And that's been really lovely too, to just have a community of people who can critique it intelligently for you.
It's really delicate to reach out to folks who are in your internal closest orbit, because it's sort of like saying, honey, do I look fat in this?
Yeah.
And, it's very difficult to get feedback from folks who are like within arm's reach.
Absolutely. And I think for me, at least with the second book, it needed to be at a place where I felt comfortable receiving both praise and criticism. So in its early chapters, when I knew it still needed a lot of finessing, that was not at a point where I was ready to share it. And I also needed to sit with it enough and be ready to get the critical feedback, because you need that, right? If you want to make it as strong as possible.
Now that you've written the Encore and it's about to drop, are you thinking about future books, maybe now that you've started with the Encore being maybe the last act in a certain situation, that you'll start at the beginning for your next story, or at least have a play on words that plays with that?
So the book that I am toying with now that has a finished first draft takes place in the art world. And I like the idea that potentially all of my fiction would sort of tackle different genres within that larger creative industry, right? I'm a huge ballet nerd. I would love to do a ballet book. I would love to do a Broadway book. So I think if I'm lucky enough to keep getting books published, that would sort of be the through line. And as that book is written right now, there is some character overlap because, the art world and the creative world is porous in that way. So I would love to have some of those Easter eggs from book to book in that way. But that book also sort of spans a great number of years, but it's just sort of one POV of one painter and all the crazy things that she gets up to.
Do you think that you'll continue your journalistic career along with your novelist type stuff?
Absolutely. I've wanted to work in magazines and as a journalist probably since I was in ninth grade. And I think they feed off of each other in a really wonderful symbiotic way, because I think journalists make great fiction writers because you're used to being edited. You can write quickly. You know how to metabolize feedback. And you're also really interested in getting your details right. And so the journalists I know who have written books really dove so deep into research for whatever the topic might be that they were writing about. And I really respect that. And I think now, having written a creative work, when I'm writing a longer form journalism piece, I think my descriptions are stronger. I think my narrative arcs are stronger because I've really been working to fine tune those as well.
What's the adjective that you think that people would describe your book at? Is it playful? Is it sad? Is it humorous? Is it life-changing? Would you kind of have a word there ready for that?
I'd love for it to be cinematic, in the sense that when you're reading it, that you can picture what's happening in a propulsive and emotional way.
Okay, because you paint pictures with words.
Right, that's the goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Juliet, this is the moment where you get to turn the tables on me. Ask me a couple of questions you always wanted to ask someone who thinks about appetite, identity, and the desire of life the way I do.
Ooh, I love this. I love when the tables get to turn. What is your perfect dinner?
It would have to be about the company and not so much about the food. So yeah, that's the biggest treat for me when it comes to having a dinner.
So who's at your dinner party if you can pick 3 people?
Alive or
Either.
gone? Either. Aristotle from the past, a great comedian, and I can't think who that would be at this moment, but someone really, really smart. And then a foodie like, I don't know, the characters that are kind of described in The Bear. but I know they're fictional, but they really have this kind of interesting, quirky approach to food. And I think I would like those three people to hang with me.
I think that would make for an excellent foursome. You'd have
It
lots
would.
to talk about.
I just don't know who would cook that dinner.
I was going to say, would you want to cook it or you'd want to have somebody else cook it?
You know, I'm always showing off, so it's not the time to do that at that dinner.
Yeah. When you don't want to be stressed about it either, right? If you're cooking for Aristotle.
But yeah, you know, it would surely kind of stimulate a wonderful argument, but that would be the fun of it if you're going to have him to dinner.
Right. I mean, that you'd have to have an argument with him. That's the whole reason why he'd be there in a way.
That's why he exists. And, you know, there is a bit of pleasure in doing the real true argument and not a fight.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you for turning the tables. It's like you took control. I love that.
I love it too.
Okay. Now let's do something else creative. This is your impromptu promo moment. We almost wrapped the show. We're getting near the end. But before we finish, I want to grab something spontaneous from you. Imagine you've just ended this conversation with me here on 50 Tastes of Grey. And a little bit later today, a friend asked you, so what was your experience like with Matthew on 50 Tastes of Grey?
You know, this has been the most deep diving podcast interview I've done so far in this book promo journey. And I have really appreciated the chance not to just talk about the book. And I could talk about the book for 10 hours, don't get me wrong, but it's been fun to also share a lot about my life outside of that and my love of food, because that's something else I could talk about for 10 hours. I could talk about melted cheese alone probably for that long. So it's just been fun to share more of myself with someone else who has similar interests.
What is your favorite melted cheese now that you've brought it up?
I mean, probably mozzarella overall. I wouldn't say that mozzarella is my favorite cheese, but it's my favorite melted cheese. And it's in my top 10 of cheeses.
Okay, so melted for things other than pizza?
Eggplant parm, lasagna.
I like the way you just fit in melted, one of your top 10 favorite melted cheeses, because now you really expanded your horizon.
I have lots of lists of cheeses. One of the things that I've wanted to do for probably a decade is Murray's Cheese here in New York runs weekend-long cheese boot camp classes. They're pretty professional, I think, and I keep it like, I need to just clear a weekend and do that. It's like a Friday night session, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And you really learn about all different types of cheeses and pairing and stuff like that. And I would love to add that to my arsenal.
You know, if you dig cheese, there was a show I did about a year ago here with Gavin Weber, the curd nerd. And
Ooh.
He's from Australia, and he's just a wonderful dude, and that's what he does. His YouTube channel is all about making cheese.
Okay, I'm going to have to go listen to that for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun one. Give me some parting shots, Juliet. What's next? Where are we going? What are we going to do? How long have we known each other now?
About an hour.
Right? Pretty
Well,
deep,
in
yes?
person. We've been emailing longer than that.
Right. Well, we were looking forward to this. It was like a grand build-up.
I know. So what's next for me? Well, obviously, I'm promoting this book, and then I'm taking a big trip to Japan. So I'm actively researching that. Part of that will be a work trip. Part of that is just for fun. So we're doing Tokyo and Kyoto, and then a handful of days in Seoul, Korea at the end. I'm really excited about that. I'll definitely be sharing all of that on my Instagram if anybody wants to follow along.
Great.
And then, hopefully getting this second book into tip-top shape and seeing if I can launch it into the world. So we'll have to see. Fingers crossed.
That sounds fantastic. Now, do you eat sushi now that you brought up that you're going to Japan?
I love sushi, yes.
Okay, so you'll be right at home.
I will, absolutely.
Would you please give us your social links so people can check you out?
Sure. I'm most active on Instagram, and my handle is just my name. So it's at Juliet Izon. Julietizon.
Instagram is your jam, not so much Facebook. And why is that? Was that a conscious decision, or is it like where old people hang out, or do you just find?
I think especially as a food and travel writer, the Instagram format makes the most sense because it is so photo driven.
Mm-hmm.
I am on Facebook, but I don't really have like a public page or a professional page. I guess I could. I mean, I've heard with authors, it's helpful to have one. So maybe that should be in my to-do list this week.
You know, the more the merrier is what they say, right?
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the social media related to your child. She's 10 years old and she's learning from mommy and she's watching you do all your things and all that and acquiring flavor and taste and knowledge based on that. What about social media for her?
She doesn't have her own. She has a private page that I started when she was born just to share pictures with friends and family. And I would imagine at some point either she will want to take that over or she'll want me to delete it or start her own new one. And so at this point, she doesn't have social media and she won't for a few more years. So right now she's fine with me sharing the occasional shot on that, you know, goes to her aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff like that.
So you don't have a particular stance on good, bad, or indifferent?
I don't think a fourth grader like she is should have access to their own social media. No, that definitely is my stance on that. I think if she wants to look at my Instagram with me because we found a cool, funny cat video, you know, that's okay.
Juliet, I hope you had a good time today here on 50 Tastes of Grey.
I had the most fun. This was delightful.
You were a great guest. I want you to say aloha to everybody.
Aloha.
It was really nice having you. Thanks for visiting.
Thanks.